In his book, Living into Focus, Arthur Boers, the author, describes this scene where there's this busload of Christians. They pull up into Amish country to see all the Amish and see how they live and all that. And if you've been to Lancaster County, you can probably imagine this, right? Like Shady Maple Smorgasbord or something. The busload of Christians pull up to see the Amish, and part of this tour involved meeting a real live Amish man. So they're on the bus, and this Amish man gets on, and one of the people on board raises their hand and says, "Now explain to me, what's the difference between Amish and other Christians?" And the Amish man goes on to explain all the ways that there's not a lot of difference. I mean, we believe in the same God and have the same Bible and worship just like other Christians. So many similarities. But then he goes on to ask the passengers a question. He says this. The Amish man looks at them and says, "Now, how many of you own a TV?" And it's like every single hand on the bus goes up, as you might imagine. And then he asks, "Now, how many of you believe that your children would be better off without a TV?" And again, every hand goes up, some snickers maybe, but everyone raises their hands. Yeah, it's probably true. And then he asks the question, "Now, how many of you, knowing this, will go home and get rid of your TV?" And no hands go up. And then he said, that's the difference between Amish and others. So I still remember the first time I heard this story, and it just struck me. It stuck with me. Now listen, I am not Amish. I am not trying to become Amish. I am under no pretense that growing a beard and growing tobacco in a field and riding in a horse and buggy, that's going to solve my problems or make the world better. I'm under no pretense. And I realize that in Jesus Christ, we have freedom. We have freedom to have cell phones and TVs and modern technology. We have that freedom. But what strikes me about this story is the fact that we've never even had this conversation before. We never even take the time to ask, hey, is this technology really good for me? Is it good for me, for my family? How is it forming us? What does this do to our lives? Does this give us the life that we really want, the life that it promises? That's what bothers me about this. So I've been thinking and praying and watching how technology forms me and forms my family and forms our church family over the past few years. But what pushed me over the edge to actually decide to stop everything and have this conversation right now was a chart. It's a chart by Dr. Jean Twenge. She is a psychologist in San Diego. She's kind of the world's leading expert on how technology is impacting Generation Z, those who are born 1995 and later. She refers to them as iGen, as in the generation that was born with an iPad in their hand. That idea. They're digital natives is the language. And the reason why she's focused on those, and the reason why I think it's helpful to look at this, is they are you familiar with this scene? This is a coal miner, and he's got a canary. Do you know the story? The coal miners, they would take a canary down into the mines, and if the air quality got too bad, if something poisonous was coming out or ran out of oxygen, the canary would die, and then the coal miners would know to get out. That's what Generation Z has been in this new digital environment. Young women in particular, they are much more vulnerable to the effects of technology, social media in particular. So if you want to see how technology is shaping us, if you want to see how it's affecting all of us, the first sign that it's affecting us is going to be in the young women in Generation Z. And this past winter, I saw this very directly in this chart. So this chart is a chart that measures the increases in depression, self-harm, suicide among U.S. adolescents from 2012 and moving on. And if you look from 2001 all the way to 2011, 2012, it's pretty much the same. It's pretty much across the chart here. You can see, things are running along the same. And this is measuring things like suicidal ideation, anxiety, depression, things like that. But then after 2011 into 2012, this happens. Suicide, self-poisoning, major depressive episodes, and depressive symptoms go off the charts. I just listened to a podcast this past week with Dr. Jean Twenge, and again, it's gone up and up since then. If you read the actual report out of which this was taken, this is a journal article from the American Psychiatric Association from just 2020. Here are a few facts from the article. Beginning in the early 2010s, self-poisoning among young girls aged 10 to 12 has quadrupled. Hospital admissions for self-harm has tripled among girls aged 10 to 14. Major depressive episodes for girls aged 12 to 17 has increased 52%. Suicide among 10 to 12-year-old girls has doubled. So just this past month, tens of thousands of internal documents from Facebook were leaked, demonstrating that Facebook and Instagram knew that Instagram was having this kind of effect on young girls, and yet they did nothing about it. But all of this is not the worst part. The worst part is that these symptoms we're talking about, these effects we're talking about, this problem we're talking about, it has hit our teens. An alarming number of our young women, of our young men, are suffering from anxiety and depression and are addicted to porn, are being crushed by social media and technology. We are living in the midst of a digital revolution. Technology is rapidly changing everything, and I'm not overstating this. It's the way we think and the way we behave and the way we relate to one another. It is hard to overstate the effects. The way we've done things for forever, for tens of thousands of years, these are being upended. The way humans have flourished and found meaning and connected to God and one another and creation, these are being radically redefined in these few short years. It's not just reshaping how we do life, it's reshaping what it means to be human. Now, I'm not saying we need to go Amish. I'm not saying that. But at what point do we say we need to have this conversation? Do we wait until our sons are addicted to porn? Do we wait until our daughters are being hospitalized for anxiety or self-harm? Do we wait until we're so distracted and so busy that we no longer even have the ability or desire to sit and pray for 5 minutes? I don't want to tell you what you can and cannot do. I have no interest in that. I just want to have the conversation. I just want to stop passively embracing every technology that comes our way as though it's obviously a good thing. I just want to be the kind of people in our church. I want to be the kind of people, the kind of community who choose for ourselves who we want to be and what we want to do, and we pursue that as opposed to having others decide that for us. And that's what we're going to do these next 2 weeks. We are going to have the conversation. So here's the question I'm wrestling with, and I want you to wrestle with these next 2 weeks. It's this: how is technology forming my soul? How is technology forming my family? What's it doing to me, to my relationships, to my family, to my love for God? Is it leading me deeper into life with God and others, or is it making me more anxious, more busy, more distracted, more consumeristic, more selfish, more outraged? Now, while this is a huge conversation, much bigger than we can have in just 2 Sundays, I am hoping to have a solid beginning to this journey. I'm hopeful that you and I can begin to figure out, begin to notice, begin to discern, begin to wrestle with, and actually make some intentional decisions about how we want to do life, about how we want to use or reject technologies in this digital age. So today, to start this conversation, I want to introduce you to 6 questions. 6 questions to ask of every technology you encounter. And while you'll hear my voice in each one of these questions, I have to give credit where credit is due. I am borrowing heavily from Arthur Boers, the author he's a professor and author that I mentioned earlier. He wrote the book Living into Focus, well worth your time. But Boers himself is actually borrowing from a Canadian Christian philosopher named Arthur Borgman. So Boers and Borgman, they have this word, alert. It is a mnemonic device used to help you remember the questions to ask of each and every technology. And it simply spells this. Alert is attention, limits, engagement, relationships, time, and space. Those are the categories. Those are the questions you need to be asking, or at least they give us the types of questions we need to be asking about technology. Now, given the amount of ground I want to cover in this message today, this message is going to be a little bit more predictable than usual. It's not going to be my normal sermon. It's not going to be an expository sermon. Instead, we're going to look at each one of these, and I'm first going to show you a biblical principle, like how has God designed us to flourish in these areas. And then we're going to look at how technologies might strain or challenge or redefine these things, these ways of flourishing. And then finally, we're going to settle on a question, so that we'll end with 6 questions that we should ask of every technology that we embrace in our lives. Now, this is less of a sermon and more of a workshop session. I hope you'll be okay with that today. I don't particularly care if you are inspired or entertained. My aim is not that you walk away with those things. My aim is that you walk away empowered. Empowered to make the critical decisions about how you want to live, who you want to be, how you want to do it with your family. All right? So that said, we're just going to go through these one at a time. And the first word I want you to look at is this word attention. Attention. So it is no accident that the book of Psalms begins with Psalm 1. Follow me here. The book of Psalms is the guide to a life of prayer, a life of worship, a life with God life. And it begins with Psalm 1 that reads like this. Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, in the way sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on his law day and night. Meditates. That is what distinguishes this kind of person. In Hebrew, the word is hagah. Hagah. It literally means to chew or ruminate. It is the image of a cow chewing its cud or a dog chewing on its bone. That's the image. It's an onomatopoeia word. It is. It sounds like what it does, like what it is. So words like pow and bam and pitter patter. It's one of those types of words. Now, for a variety of reasons, ancient people, when they read, they always read out loud. So, when they were reading to themselves, you would see them, not reading to you, but reading to themselves, looking down at the words, and their lips would be moving as they read it aloud to themselves, and it would look and sound like they were going, Hagah, 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 Hagah. So the people of God, they saw this, and they picked this up. It looks like, when you're meditating on God's word, when you're reading it aloud to yourself, it looks like you're eating it. That the image of the blessed person, the person who really knows and loves God, the person whose life is flourishing, that person, they feast on God's word. They eat it. It's their daily bread. They meditate on it and chew over it and ruminate over it. They give their undivided attention to everything God says, to God himself. And that person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season. This is the person who flourishes. So get the logic here. This doesn't just happen to be the first psalm. This was placed purposefully at the beginning of the book of Psalms, the life of prayer, the life of worship. Why? Because the only way you can possibly experience this kind of life with God, this kind of life of flourishing, this deep, rich fullness of life, is by giving your undivided attention to God, to his word, to his presence. That is how a relationship with God begins. That's how it's sustained, and that's how you're transformed from the inside out. When we give our undivided attention to him. Your attention is precious. What you give your attention to will affect your attitude, your thoughts, how you see the world. What holds your attention will direct your desires. It will determine your stress levels. It will shape your behaviors. If you don't give God your attention, if you can't or won't, you will be like the wicked, who are like chaff. It's blown away by the wind. So, that's what the Bible says. So what happens then when technological advances push us into what is called not a consumer economy, but an attention economy? What happens when the main thing that business is competing for is no longer oil or steel or wood or wheat, but it's your attention? What happens when the largest corporations in the world literally build their business model around capturing and selling off your attention? When unresting algorithms and AI literally work around the clock to find a way to suck you in? So 7 years ago, the CEO of Microsoft described it this way. He said this: "We are moving from a world where computing power was once scarce to a place where it is now almost limitless, and where the true scarce commodity is increasingly human attention." So again, I ask, what happens when everyone is competing for your attention? So here's what I want you to do. We're going to take a quick awareness test. It's a little exercise I want you to do. It's based on the work of Daniel Simmons out of Cornell University, psychologist. I don't want you to overthink it. Just follow the instructions. So we're going to watch this quick video, and then I'll come back and ask you a question.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go!
So in the video, we see these two teams, the black team, the white team, passing basketballs, and they ask you to just count how many times the white team passes the ball, and somehow, just by paying attention to that one particular thing, I don't know about you, but I completely, as ridiculous as this sounds, I completely missed that in the midst of that video, there is a moonwalking bear. If we aren't so careful, if we aren't vigilant, if we just unthinkingly download that app and reply to that email and welcome any and every technology into our lives, our attention will be captured and sold to the highest bidder. We will lose the ability and even the desire to give our attention to God. God could be doing the moonwalk right in front of our faces, and we would never even see him. So here's the question I want you to ask. When it comes to your attention, here's the question. How does this technology affect my ability to give my undivided attention to what is most important? How does this technology affect my ability to give my undivided attention to what is most important? Number 2, limits. So in ancient Corinth, they had this popular slogan, and it went like this: I have the right to do anything. It must have been fairly popular because the Apostle Paul refers to it twice in his first epistle to the Corinthians. It seems to mean, at least in 1 Corinthians 6, like the way that this was applied is that I have the right to do anything meant I have the right to do anything. Because I'm forgiven by Jesus Christ, I can do whatever I want. My actions don't have consequences. So for example, in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, it means I can sleep with anyone I want. I can cross-dress if I want to. I have the right to use my body however I wish and to define my sexuality however I want. I have the right to do anything. All of these were very much pressing issues in Corinth like they are today. But the Apostle Paul, when they say that slogan, he begs to differ. Watch this. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12, he says this: I have the right to do anything, quoting them, you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but I will not be mastered by anything. So the Corinthians, much like Americans, they seem to think that freedom means I can do whatever I want. So long as it doesn't hurt anyone, I can do whatever I want. So sexual freedom, for example, is doing as much as you possibly can. The only pertinent question then for them was, what am I allowed to do, or how far can I go? Which reminds me of what it was like when I used to work with teens back in Dallas. So at this church in Dallas, I worked with these these high school boys, and every time they would get in a relationship with a girl, the first question they had to ask me was this: how far can I go? And I mean, they wanted to know specifics, like as far as they possibly could go. How close could they get to that line? And while I very much appreciate the sexual pressures of these young people, get the heart of this question. What they're really asking is this: what's the most I can get away with? What's the most I can do and still be a follower of Jesus? And my answer traditionally would be like this: well, let's see, the most you can do and still follow Jesus. Let's see, King David, he committed adultery. He had someone murdered and then he lied about it. I guess you could do that and still be considered part of the people of God. What's the least I can do and still get into heaven? Well, the guy hanging next to Jesus on the cross, he literally did nothing. He did nothing. Like, he spent his whole life. He was a thief. He was being executed because he deserved it. And Jesus looked at him, though. At the last moment of his life, he looked to Jesus, turned to Jesus, and Jesus looked at him and said, "Surely you will be with me in paradise today." I guess then you could do that. You could live your whole life in selfishness and evil, and then at the very last second turn to Jesus. It is possible. Is that what you really want? Is that what you want your life to look like? Like, why are we plotting to see how much evil we can do? Why are we trying to get away with as much as we can? Why are we scheming to see how little we can follow Jesus in this life? This is not life. This is not freedom. The Apostle Paul says, I have the right to do anything. That's what you say, but not everything's beneficial. I will not be mastered by anything. The Apostle Paul says that the question is not, what can I get away with? But is it beneficial? Is it good? Does it lead me to the life that I'm created for? Does it lead me into community? Does it lead me to God? Not the question is, can I do it? But does it give me true freedom? Or does it master me? So the author G.K. Chesterton has this famous line. He was famous for smoking cigars and drinking scotch. And he used this illustration. He said, in the name of freedom, a man will declare, I have the right to drink scotch and smoke cigars. And it's true. In Christ, you have that freedom. You can. But, he said, if that man drinks scotch and smokes a cigar every time he desires it, then soon he will no longer have any freedom except to decide what type of cigar and what type of scotch to drink. He will have to drink and he will have to smoke. In the name of freedom, people become enslaved. If I always give in to my desires, if I always do what I want, I will become a slave to my own desires. Now, what does this have to do with technology? Technology makes gratifying our desires easy, instant, and anonymous. It lowers our guard. It numbs us. It removes any sense of accountability. It makes it so much easier to give in to your lowest desires. So whether it be the ease of frictionless automated consumerism on Amazon, or the moral numbing effect of Netflix, or the anonymity of online porn, or simply the addictive nature of technology itself, like smartphones, people are either unwilling or unable. Those who are unwilling or unable to put any boundaries on their phone, their email, their social media, their television. Those who don't put any boundaries on it, they will eventually, their freedom will lead to slavery. So here's the question. When it comes to limits and technology, here's the question. How does this technology affect my sense of what is appropriate and good? Or if you rather, does this technology give me true freedom, or does it lead me towards slavery? Does this technology make it easier for me to express my most base desires, or does it lift me and push me to reflect the image of God, my highest desires? Number 3, engagement. So one of my favorite Jesus stories is in Mark chapter 5. Jesus has had this crazy busy day. Everyone's pushing in on him. Everyone wants something from him. He's pulled in a million directions. Crowds are literally pushing in on him. And this desperate father comes up to him and says, my daughter's dying. Will you please come with me and heal her? So Jesus is coming with him, but the crowds are pressing in as he does it. And on the way there, he stops everything and asks the question, who just touched me? And Peter's like, are you really, is that a real question you're asking? Because you're being pressed in by a crowd, like everybody's touching you. But Jesus won't drop it. He's like, no, we're going to stop right here. Who touched me? And this woman, this hurting woman who suffered from a bleeding issue for 12 years, this woman who's impoverished. The text says she'd spent all she had on doctors. This lonely woman that no one would want to be around, no one would want to touch. Jesus stops everything, draws her out of the crowd. And in the midst of this crisis, in the midst of the crowd, in the midst of being pulled in a million directions, he stops and he sees her. He recognizes her. He stops to really see her in her pain and her hurt. And he says to her, Mark chapter 5, verse 34, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. And she went away healed. That ability to see what's most important, that in the midst of the craziness, in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of everyone screaming for your attention, when you feel pulled in a million directions, and yet you can stop and see the person in need right in front of you, that's engagement. It's the ability to deeply engage in the moment, to really see those who are standing right in front of you, to be fully present. Now here's the question. What happens when you put a smartphone in everyone's hand? So have you seen this? Here's a picture. This is St. Peter's at the Vatican, in front of the Vatican in Rome, St. Peter's Basilica. This is right in front of it. This is a crowd waiting to hear from the Pope in 2005. Well, someone snapped this exact same picture, exact same crowd, exact same scene, waiting to hear from the Pope in 2013. Do you notice the difference? Every single person has a cell phone in their hand. They're no longer experiencing it. They're experiencing it through their phone or through their tablet. What happens when everything we do, everything we experience, everything we say, everything we encounter is now mediated through a smart device? So here's question number 3, question on engagement. Does this technology help me engage those around me more deeply? Or does it numb me, distract me, and make me feel less likely to really see people? Does this technology help me engage, or does it numb me, distract me, and make me less likely to see people? Number 4, relationships. So in Romans chapter 12, this is kind of the theme verse, 12 verses 1 and 2, kind of the theme of our vision. That we want to become a church where life transformation is normal. And it comes right out of verse 2. Do not be conformed by the pattern of this world. Don't just go along with this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Don't do what everyone else is doing, but follow a new way. Let God's story enter into your heart through your mind, control your attention, grab hold of your heart, and change you from the inside out. That's the vision. But when we ask the Apostle Paul, what does this look like? What does this transformation look like when it's actually lived out? When we ask the Apostle Paul that, he immediately starts talking about relationships. So Romans 12, verse 3. Do not think of yourself more highly than you ought. Verse 4. For just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others, that we are one, we belong to one another. Do you hear this language? The Apostle Paul seems to think that being transformed, that giving ourselves to Jesus and being transformed has, in some sense, means that it unifies us. In some sense, it means that we are giving ourselves to one another. We belong to one another. And then in verse 9 and following, The Apostle Paul just gives this string of one-liners to give us a sense of what this transformed life looks like. It starts out like this. I love this line. Love must be sincere. Literally, in the Greek, it's a negative. It says not hypocritical. That in ancient Greek, the word hypocrite described an actor, literally an actor, someone who wore a mask. And the Apostle Paul says, love, what we're called to, this life of transformation, love doesn't wear the mask. It takes the mask off. It doesn't pretend to be someone it's not. Hate what is evil and cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Live in harmony with one another. Do not repay evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Do you hear this? The life that we're called to, the life of flourishing, the life of Jesus, the life that we're invited into, the life we're created to do is a life together. We are created to live in deeply connected webs of relationships. When we flourish, it is when we forgive. It is when we share our lives with one another. It's when we're deeply connected, when we're deeply rooted in relationships, when we overcome evil with good. But according to recently leaked documents from Facebook, this loving stuff does not seem to increase engagement on Facebook or Instagram. Rather, hateful, divisive, and polarizing content. That's what keeps people clicking. That's what sells. So that's what the Facebook algorithm actually favors. Now, you might not have an account on Facebook, so you might not know what I'm talking about. But let's put this in context here. Currently, there are 2.89 billion Facebook users on planet Earth. And to put that in perspective, there are only about 3.5 billion people who are over the age of 13 and have access to internet on planet Earth. This suggests that approximately 8 out of every 10 people on the planet who could have a Facebook account do. So you might not use Facebook, but you and I both, we live in a world shaped by the Facebook algorithm. And it's not just Facebook. This is the logic, this is the economic reality that drives news outlets, that drives YouTube, that drives Google, that drives anything driven by popular demand. The results are now well known. We live in a world that is increasingly tribal, increasingly isolated, toxic, outraged. Loneliness is now increasingly considered a major public health crisis. That the technologies designed to connect us socially are driving us apart. That the technologies designed to increase efficiency are driving us away from human interaction. It's becoming increasingly rare for any of us to actually have a human interaction when we buy groceries, when we go to the bank, when we get gas, or the like. So earlier this year, there was an article, you may have seen this, a student at Concordia University, he emailed his art history professor, and the course he was actively taking, he was in the middle of the course, he emailed his art history professor, only to find out that his professor had died. But since the professor had pre-recorded all of his lectures, the course went on and the school didn't even notify the students. That we now live in a day where you might be, and I could be dead and you're watching this sermon right now. Like technology has allowed us to automate, depersonalize, scale, share, connect, and disconnect in ways that previous generations could not imagine. What is this doing to our relationships? That's the question. So here's the question I want you to ask when you come to any technology with regard to relationships. How does this technology foster or hinder deep, rich, authentic relationships with others? How does this technology foster or hinder deep, rich, authentic relationships with others? Does it help me take off the mask? Does it help me stop pretending or stop feeling like I've got to be someone I'm not? Does it foster those deep human interactions, or does it make it harder to understand, harder to connect, harder to empathize? Does it increase my love for enemies, or does it foster fear and hatred and make me want to curse them. Number 5, time. So these last 2 points are fairly brief from Genesis 1 and 2. Time. In Genesis chapter 1, God, when he creates the heavens and the earth, he builds a rhythm into creation itself. And you can hear it in the text. It's like, and God said, let there be light. And he saw that the light was good, and it was evening and morning the first day. God said, and he saw that it was good, and there was evening and morning the second day. God said, and he saw that it was good, and there was evening and morning. There's this rhythm, this God-ordained rhythm, like baked in, built into creation itself. But it isn't just cyclical. It's not just like an never-ending drum beat that day is followed by night and year by year forever and ever. Instead, it's headed somewhere. Like the week itself, it's headed somewhere. It's headed to this climax we call Sabbath. That on the 7th day, there's a time where we come a time of rest, a time that is sacred, a time of delight, a time to be with God. The time itself from creation is headed somewhere. And we see this ultimately played out in the scriptures, that time itself will head to Revelation chapter 19 through 22, when the Lord himself will come and all things will be made new. So this gives weight and meaning to our lives, that life is not so much measured in days and years as it is in moments. Moments that shape us, to point us towards our ultimate end, toward the ultimate day of rest and delight with God. And God, in the scriptures, he's not within time, but he sits above time. He is sovereign over time, so time serves him. It obeys him, so he's never in a hurry. He's never short on time, never has more to do than hours to do it. He never feels enslaved or controlled by time. I recently stumbled upon a book by a Japanese theologian, Dr. Koyama. Not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly there. And his book was called this, 3 Mile an Hour God. 3 Mile an Hour God. You know where he got that name? That is the average pace of human walking. Koyama's point is that if we hope to walk with God, we would do best to travel at his speed. It is when you're walking, not sprinting, not rushing, but strolling, walking with God in the cool of the evening. That is where you're open to his presence. That is where you experience him most deeply. But I'm guessing, if you're anything like me, that is not your usual experience of time. From the invention of the clock, to the electric light, to the alarm clock, to the internet, one by one, technologies have divorced our lives from any of these natural rhythms. We no longer respect and hardly notice the rhythms of creation, the idea of sacred times and seasons, or that time itself is pointed somewhere, that all of that feels foreign to us. All of that feels forced or outside or extraneous. All we know is the constant limitations of time. All we know is the sense that there's more to do, more to consume, more to experience than there are hours in the day. And this leads us, as we all know, to the all too common experience of hurry sickness, FOMO, anxiety, chronic busyness, distraction, and burnout. So here's the question in relation to time and technology. How does this technology affect my ability to live in the present and to connect with the God-ordained rhythms of life? How does this technology affect my ability to live in the present and connect with the God-ordained rhythms of life? And last, space. In Genesis chapter 2, God takes the dirt, the earth, the Adamah, and he forms Adam, human, and he breathes into his nostrils and he becomes a living being. In the scriptures, there is a direct, organic, natural, God-given connection between who we are created to be and the stuff of earth, between who we are and the place we live in. So it's not just in creation, though. It's also in salvation. So when God wants to redeem humanity, he doesn't just say to Abraham, hey, Abram, I want to be your God. I want to save all of humanity. No, he doesn't. He says, Abram, I want you to go to the land that I will show you. There's a particular place that I picked out, the promised land, and that place is where I'm going to do my work of making all things new. And then throughout the scriptures, the whole of God's work, the whole of creation and recreation is inextricably bound in place in Bethlehem, in Nazareth, in Cana, in Bethany, in the Jordan River, in the Sea of Galilee, and in the mountains, in the neighborhoods, in the cities, in the fields, in the desert. Places matter to God. Places shape who we are. They form who we are. We are inextricably made from them, bound up with them. This place called Earth, it matters to God. But technology has increasingly disconnected our lives from any sense of space or place. We are losing any direct, organic, natural, God-given connection with place, earth, neighborhood, land. So as we increasingly move towards working remotely, or online shopping, or online education, or online banking, or online relationships, and the like, our virtual environment is now overshadowing our environment. I don't know if you've heard, but billionaires in Silicon Valley are actually literally working on a place they call the metaverse, a virtual universe. A virtual universe, which, if they have their way, will become the primary place of business, entertainment, and socializing in the future. Now, of course, there's no way that could possibly go wrong, that they would create their own separate virtual universe in which we all live our lives in. And yet, the craziest thing about this is that this actually seems like this could be a real possibility. Like, this might be something we're facing in the next 10, 20 years. So here's the question I want to ask, though, as the people of God, as people who follow Jesus. When it comes to this issue of space, how does this technology affect my connection with creation, with place, neighborhood, geography, and land? With everything technology gives us, and it gives us so much, there's a trade-off. There is no question technology is making our life easier, cheaper, more convenient. But we have to ask, is it making our lives better? And these are the 6 questions, the 6 areas I want you to think about. Alerts, attention, limits, engagement, relationships, time, space. This is my invitation to you. Have the conversation. I'm not going to tell you what you can or cannot do, but don't wait to see what technology does to you or to your kids. You decide. Choose the life you want to live. Choose the kind of person you want to be. Don't blindly embrace whatever Apple or Amazon or Google or Facebook sends your way. And all of this starts by just sitting down and having the conversation with God, with your spouse, with your close friends, with your whole family. And it starts by asking these 6 questions. Let's do it.